Hello, I'm Dr. Brian G.M. Durie. Welcome to our podcast, aptly named Conversations with Dr. Durie. This podcast is brought to you by the International Myeloma Foundation. Today, I will be speaking with Sue Dunnet, who is Senior Lecturer in the Business School at the University of Edinburgh, and she is going to talk about what it means to be resilient. So I'm very pleased to welcome everyone to this discussion about resilience. Right now, I'm pleased to welcome Sue Dunnet, who is a senior lecturer in the business school at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And I'm very pleased to welcome Sue. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And so it's interesting to ponder why Sue Dunnet in a business school is interested in resilience and how might resilience be important for patients with myeloma. And so perhaps, Sue, you could start by harking back a little bit in history and how you came to be connected with myeloma and subsequently with the importance of resilience.
Sure. Working for the International Myeloma Foundation here in the UK was actually my first job out of university, and it was one that I loved. So I loved working with myeloma patients and support groups, and I helped set up some support groups here in the UK. And then I went back into university to further my kind of academic side of my career. And I then knew that actually what I wanted to do was keep my connection to myeloma and to people living with myeloma. And my PhD actually was focused in on how people live with myeloma and how support groups specifically allow those living with myeloma to navigate the healthcare market and what that means in terms of when someone is a patient and they become a consumer in the healthcare market. And I did that research in the support groups of Wisconsin with a wonderful leader called Chuck Koval, who led the Madison support group in Wisconsin. So despite the fact that I did my PhD here in Scotland, I've actually always researched and worked with the wonderful IMF community in the States and worked with support groups there. And then when that project was over, I began working at Edinburgh University in the business school because my PhD is in a business subject. Thinking about consumer research really is my area. So how culture and other factors affect our lives as consumers. I think particularly what I'm interested in with healthcare is access to the healthcare market and how the idea of being a consumer rather than being a patient changes the fundamental nature of healthcare. And it's quite interesting being someone who's from Scotland in the UK, where we have a socialised service. It's quite interesting doing that comparison with your kind of marketized healthcare in the States. So that's where my interest has been there for many years.
And so obviously you became very intimately involved with the details of myeloma patients, the impact of the diagnosis and the difficulties often in trying to achieve the best care. And so maybe you could move forward and explain a little bit of the notion of resilience and how did that arise as an area of particular focus for you?
Yeah, sure. So some years ago now, when I'm still working at University of Edinburgh, I decided that what I really had loved doing was research with the IMF and the myeloma community, and I was interested in how people living with an illness, whether they're a caregiver or whether they're a patient themselves, how they lead support groups at the same time as dealing with their own illness, and what propels them to do that, what allows them to be motivated to help others. And then are there any barriers to helping others in that support group setting? So my next project kind of focused on leadership in that area. And one of the things that I asked everyone that I interviewed about 20 support group leaders from across the USA, was what keeps you going? Because I think, people who are in that leadership position, and it's not simply patients and caregivers, obviously are professional services and people that provide that, who are social workers or nurses or other forms of medical workers, they can feel a certain sense of burnout in that process if they've been doing it for a number of years. It is emotional labor, and so it can be quite taxing. So I was interested in this idea of what keeps you going. And the support group leaders that I interviewed talked a lot about factors which I would have called resilience, but they were describing as being quite normal and they would expect themselves to behave in this way, to keep going for other people, to use inner reserves to keep going. So I explored resilience in leadership initially. So what kept them going specifically as people leading a group initially. And then, so that was work that I presented at the Support Group Leaders Summit, which is an annual event where support group leaders come together. So that allowed me to share insight on how I believe they were motivated and what barriers they faced and so on. And then I suppose the interest in resilience just continued.
All right, I do remember that presentation, which I think did have a big impact on the leaders present. This was in 2018, in the summer of 2018, and at that meeting, we bring together about 100 of group leaders from across the country, and so I think this did have a big impact and made the leaders and the patients, everyone there, focus a little bit more about what is the meaning of this word resilience, and potentially how important it is in addressing all the different concerns and questions, and the ability to keep going in the face of adversity of all types.
Yeah, and I think resilience. I mean, resilience is a little bit of a buzzword at the moment, but I think sort of concepts come in and out of fashion. I think it is because it's actually quite a useful term. For me, the idea of resilience is, as you say, kind of adapting to circumstances. So it's not necessarily resilience. The important thing for me is resilience is not necessarily about totally overcoming something, which, as we know, people living with myeloma cannot control, and they cannot necessarily totally overcome myeloma. So the idea of being resilient, I think, is particularly pertinent when living with illness, because it requires so much from the individuals and those around them in terms of emotional energy, in terms of physical ability, in terms of physical energy, in terms of stamina. And so resilience is something that I see as kind of a process of adapting, but not that sense of bouncing back. I think sometimes the idea that resilience is about bouncing back. I think these profound fundamental experiences like serious illness, they change us. So we're not necessarily bouncing right back to where we were. So that's kind of what resilience means to me.
Yeah, very, very important distinction. But you've emphasized a few points there. So resilience is very much an active process. It's not just something that's there. Obviously, it seems that some people are naturally more resilient than others. But for most of us, I think it's a skill that can be recognized and kind of worked on to try to improve the ability to cope in various ways.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think learning, whether that's about myeloma, whether that's about the treatments or other ways of living with myeloma, definitely factor into that kind of building of resilience. And I think, I like the word you use, it's kind of active process there, rather than, someone is resilient or they're not. And also I like to think of it as being distinct from being positive. I know that there can be a lot of pressure on people dealing with any sort of adversity to think positively, and that will dramatically change the situation. Well, there are some situations which, of course, can be shifted mentally by thinking positively, but they don't necessarily fundamentally change. And resilience is not simply about thinking positively. It is much more of a kind of process, a set of skills, an attitude, and a way of thinking. And it is learned rather than, if you like, a particular demeanor that you can adopt.
Moving forward from that presentation in 2018 in the summer, in the intervening months, you came up with a new idea which related to asking leaders and patients to submit pictures for a project that related to resilience. Do you want to explain to our listeners how you came up with that and the details of this project?
Sure. Well, it just came to me one day. I was wanting to explore resilience a little bit more and thinking about how I could do that and how I could do something that might be actually useful and valuable practically along those lines for the IMF and the support group community. So I think I was thinking of the style of communication of something like Instagram, where there's a quick perhaps impactful visual image, which captures emotion, which captures feeling, which captures a moment in time. And I think what I was really hoping for, which did transpire in the project, was that leaders could capture an image which represented resilience to them. It's very hard for us to articulate what we mean by our own resilience or what things keep us resilient. So the discipline of taking a picture of something, which is what we asked them to do. All the support group leaders were asked to contribute. Take a picture of something which represents resilience or makes you feel resilient. So, and that captured a lot of emotion, a lot of things that actually are very difficult to articulate that we might not have captured, for example, by asking people to participate in a questionnaire or participate in an interview or even just by talking to people. So the idea came then to use the images to create a gallery display, like an art gallery or like a photography display at the Support Group Leaders Summit, that people could walk around, that they could engage with the images, and then hopefully share in the kind of collective sense of resilience. So the idea was very much about individuals contributing to something which created a sort of community resource or a particular display that everyone could participate in at the Support Group Leaders Summit event.
This was a very successful project, and as I recall, I think there were 55 pictures or thereabout that were sent in, and they were indeed displayed at the summit and had little sayings or descriptions associated with them. And do you want to lead us through what struck you about these pictures that were submitted that reflected people's feelings about resilience?
Sure. Well, yeah, going back to the idea of the aims, the aim that I had, I suppose, was to harness some of the creativity of the support group community and the IMF staff as well, because I could see that there was creative stuff going on at the Support Group Leaders Summit. People sing, people show their line dancing skills and play piano. They share these ways in which they are creative together. So another aim of the project was to be creative together and to share something there. And again, my aim was to create something that would allow people to share hope and their creativity, and then hopefully share resilience. And it definitely did. And as you say, we got 55 photographs, which as they came in, Robin Toohey, the director of the IMF Support Group Services, she would send them on to me in my office in Edinburgh. And so they'd come in via the email or sent directly from the support group leaders. And sitting at my desk in Edinburgh, so far away, but the kind of emotional connection of seeing the images was instant. So the images were all of all sorts of different types of things. I'm looking at some of them now. They were of grandchildren, they were of weddings, they were of travels. There was a lot of dogs. Animals, of course, are so important to us. There was jigsaws, there was plants, there was motorbikes, there was all sorts of aspects of things. And I think one of the elements that really did work was that people took pictures of things that symbolized something to them. So there were abstract pictures which had a deep symbolic meaning. So there were plants just beginning to unfurl at the start of spring after maybe a difficult winter. So that sense of coming back. There were sunrises. So the idea that there's always a fresh day, there's always a new start, there's always opportunity. There were sunsets in terms of the beauty of nature. There was quite a lot of nature there in terms of the themes: donkeys, cats, lots of different types of creatures. I think it was interesting to see cooking being part of that. And I think one of the things that I'd sort of noted about the images was that the images, I felt, really did create that emotional response. They did make us feel. There were beautiful images of sunset, nature, mountains, and so on. Things that do make us kind of wonder at the majesty of things that are more powerful than us. So there was lots of different elements in there. I think the cooking was the one that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but I think when I really think about it, cooking, of course, is something that's very meditative, therapeutic. It can be relaxing. It's also creative, and it can be someone's personal gift for themselves, for their family that they share. So, of course, it helps enrich individuals' resilience. So there was lots of interesting things there, and it was a lovely thing to have them come in over email into my office in Edinburgh.
Yeah, really, really lovely, wonderful pictures, a lot of activities indicating that despite the challenges that many of these individuals faced with their disease or in other ways, they were able to go to a wedding that maybe they had not thought they might be able to go to, or to continue to cook in exciting ways, or to be able to go on vacation and enjoy nature, or experience, as I remember, an old tree in the garden of one of the leaders, which was an ancient tree that had survived despite adversity in New York. So lots of different kinds of images that were there. But maybe what was surprising to me and to you, I think, is what kind of images were not there.
Yeah, so the images that weren't there, despite the prompt saying they could be included, were images of the medical setting or pharmaceuticals or any sort of treatment. So there was nothing, I would say, nothing medical in any of the pictures. And I think Robin Toohey kind of summed that up quite nicely when I was speaking to her about it, and she said, "Well, we're not our myeloma. The resilience is who we really are." So one of the really nice things about the project is it allows people to get to know each other on a kind of different level, to see the things that might be fundamental in each other's lives through these pictures and to talk about it. So the idea of the gallery meant that people could talk about the pictures as they were moving around and share their experiences of resilience. But it was interesting about the medical setting. What do you think of that, Dr. Durie?
Well, I was impressed with it. I think to me, it sent a message that the patients were saying that this is who they are. They're not defining who they are by the disease or the specifics of that. They're going back to who are they, and they are people who enjoy their families, who want to experience celebrations with their families, to experience vacations and beautiful nature, and to be able to cook a great meal together, so that they were really pointing away from the disease to go beyond that and getting back towards a degree of normality. So it was lovely to see, quite frankly.
I mean, I think for me, there was a lot of images which really made me think about the idea of the extraordinary in the ordinary. So the idea of how important our homes become and how important, everyday hobbies can be, how important our connections to the people who are all around us. And I think it's interesting looking at these images today as we're here in the UK in lockdown and thinking around the appreciation of these more ordinary or simple things in our lives that we can take resilience from, and we can remember how important they are to us in helping us cope with adversity.
Absolutely. And this strong belief in the meaning and strength of life more broadly. I mean, it symbolizes that there is an active project to go out and experience life and enjoy life. And it's important to include that and get back to that as much as possible. Really, I mean, I have to congratulate you. This was really such a successful and emotional project, and really made the groups and the patients think a lot about these things. And this theme has been picked up in the months since then. And as you mentioned, at this particular time, when we are now faced with a new crisis, this COVID-19 infection, I think this idea of resilience and how do we react to it has become even more poignant.
Yeah, and I think in the images, so the analysis that I did on the images, we're looking at kind of what visual themes I could see in the images. So I took the 55 images and did a little bit of kind of cursory analysis to kind of group them together to see what I was seeing. Breaking those down into three different themes, there was the idea of physical resilience, so the body and renewal, showing strength, showing achievement, and the idea of mental resilience, de-stressing, using hobbies, activities as a release, creating space, creating peace, and then emotional resilience, where there was joy and freedom and the support of others. We may not have access to all of these things at the moment, and of course it's an incredibly frightening time for everyone worldwide, but particularly for people living with myeloma for a variety of reasons. I think there are ways in which we can be reminded to seek out resilience in day-to-day activities by recognizing that the process of cooking or just being with family and friends, of taking a walk if that's possible, for people to kind of take breaks, to remember that emotional resilience is as important, I suppose, as the physical resilience to the whole act of being resilient.
There is a strong sense of this need to just retreat a little bit to kind of an inner space to try to seek some calm. And we certainly need to try to do that right now. The sort of Zen approach where we try to retreat and try to have a rational idea of how we can move forward. But there's also the idea of resilience together, and we've seen quite a bit of that, where we've had group telecons and the like, where the coming together of these leaders and having a joint resilience has become something that is very important.
Yeah, and I think, well, this is a very strange time in the sense that we're all separated mostly from our kind of wider networks, and in many cases those who are our most beloved. But we're also connected in other ways with our local communities. Certainly here in the UK, there's a lot more kind of local activity going on and creating those spaces for the emotional aspects of resilience. You know, the idea of caring for others, and that's something that I also saw a lot in the resilience pictures, was the fact of caring for others allowed people to feel resilient. Maybe not surprising coming from support group leaders who that is their kind of vocation, their sense of duty is to care for other people, to set up these groups. But the sense of caring for others was something that did make people feel resilient. And then recognizing that not everyone can be resilient all the time, I think, is another thing that's really important to talk about with resilience, is that it's not always there. You know, in many situations, we do not always feel resilient, and we need to take a break and take stock of that and know that it will return and be replenished. And seeing these pictures reminds me of the kind of simple acts and the people that can enrich resilience in our lives. So yeah, staying connected digitally definitely helps.
Right, right. You emphasize one point there, which I think is really important, the need to recharge. I think that none of us feel 100% resilient every day. At some point you need to step back and just have some quiet time and recharge so that you can focus and do the best that you can in the coming days. So Sue, this was obviously a very successful project that highlighted a lot of really interesting and new aspects of resilience. Now, do you have ideas of how this might move forward? I understand that you do have a day job where you are in the business school and you have other things that have a priority. But are there aspects to this that could be for the future?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, well, firstly, it's important to be of service and value to the myeloma community, and particularly the support group community, because they've given me so much. In a sense, you know, the data that I collected for my PhD is the reason I'm an academic, and that came from people who are members of myeloma support groups and who lead those groups. So I'm forever grateful to the myeloma community for my first job, for the experience, the wonderful experiences that I've had. It's important to me to keep contributing in whatever small way I can. That's why I'm thrilled that some of the support groups have picked up on this idea of either a gallery of resilience or a PowerPoint, or creating something together which allows them to share photographs of resilience, to get to know each other better and to celebrate that. Some groups have had galleries and displays in their local areas, and they're taking it forward in their own ways. I know that one group is collecting playlists and music around the idea of staying strong at this particular moment in this difficult setting. So it's really nice that that's gone forward. For me, I think, I'll always want to contribute to whatever I can in the Support Group Leaders Summit, but thinking research-wise, I think it is probably really important to think more widely about resilience in terms of not simply support group leaders, but maybe thinking about the myeloma patient population in general. So what factors contribute towards resilience? And then what are the barriers to resilience? And obviously these can be multiple and intersectional. They're not necessarily linked to the themes that we've talked about. They can be around socio-economic issues or education, and more widely, all sorts of different aspects can contribute to how resilient individuals are. And I think, and obviously the disease progress itself. So something quantitative could be interesting in the sense of a survey to look at what factors contribute towards resilience and what, I suppose, detract from resilience. I think also it might be useful for the IMF to consider the role of support groups in resilience. So mapping out how support groups allow individual members, whether that's again caregivers, family members, and myeloma patients, how it allows them to be resilient. An interesting question to me is, are regular attendees of a support group more resilient, for example? Or perhaps they're not, because, maybe people who are not in support groups somehow are more resilient and carrying on. I suspect that is not the case. I think support groups must be integral to an individual's ability to cope and an ability to keep going, and therefore that sense of adapting in adversity that resilience is. So I think, even looking at the impact and role in the IMF and their services in resilience. So there's lots of ways of looking at it quantitatively, which would derive that sort of kind of statistical insight, I suppose. That's an area that I suppose newer for me. I'm more interested in people's lived experiences and how they talk about themselves, and therefore I'm interested in myeloma patients' advice and insight on how to be resilient. So I think widening things out to a wider patient population to find out about what is resilience more widely, and then how do we hone and build resilience skills, and what part do support groups in the IMF play in that? Because I know that it's going to be a pretty important aspect of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this last part, how do we hone these resilience skills, will be very broadly important moving forward right now. But I think that the idea of resilience and these concepts have really taken on a life of their own, and I think that this is a major contribution that is going to be sustained and will continue in the myeloma groups here in the US. And we're certainly trying to enhance that understanding and appreciation in the groups all around the world, as a matter of fact. So this has had a global reach. It has been a topic that has resonated, and people are interested in, are they resilient? How can they be more resilient? I think there's a intuitive understanding that it's good to try to be resilient because the outcomes can be better, and that you can do better overall, and you can be able to appreciate and enjoy life. So Sue, I mean, I don't want to keep you too long. I've really appreciated all these insights and helpful comments about resilience, and thank you for making these contributions, which have been so important to the support group leaders, and also, I think, will be increasingly important for each of the individual patients. So thank you for contributing to this podcast today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. This has been Conversations with Dr. Brian Durie. For more information about multiple myeloma and the International Myeloma Foundation, please visit myeloma.org.